Welcome to Resilient. I'm Lori Lorenzo, Deloitte Research and Insights Director for our Chief Legal Officer program and host of the Resilient Chief Legal Officer track. What does happiness have to do with resilience? In this episode, which is part of our influencer series, Neil Pasricha, author of The Happiness Equation and the Book of Awesome, shares unique insights and practices for fostering happiness and the connection happiness has to fostering resilience. From growing up in a family where resilience was ingrained in his bones, to grappling with personal failures and trauma, and ultimately embracing the power of positivity, Neil's story is a testament to the human spirit. Let's hear what Neil has to say. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being my guest today.
My pleasure, Lori. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to talk to you. You are our second guest in our influencer series. And as a reminder to our listeners, our influencers are people that have stories, expertise, skill sets, research on topics that can help any leader really think about their leadership style and how they want to show up in their leadership role. Neil's area of expertise is happiness, and I don't know anyone that wouldn't be happy to be a little more happy. So how did you get started on this path?
Sure, absolutely. My dad is born Surinder Kumar Pasricha in a village outside of Taran, India on December 1st, 1944. Although he says he doesn't really know his birthday because nobody wrote birthdays down. A lot of kids, not a lot of notepads. My mom was born in Nairobi, Kenya, from actually a wealthy family at the time, but the India-Pakistan partition was happening and my mom's family's wealth was all on the wrong side of the border. So she went from the top of the caste to the bottom of the caste pretty quickly and went from rich to poor pretty quickly. Her family fled East Africa during the Idi Amin dictatorship. My dad was able to get a master's in nuclear physics from his poor upbringing and used that to springboard into Canada as the first ever high school physics teacher in the Toronto suburbs. So my dad came over to Canada in 1966. He dated here unsuccessfully for a number of years. And then one summer in about 72, he went back to England where he had some family. And my mom's family, who had fled East Africa, who had gone to England, introduced my dad to my mom. They had one date. On the date, my dad said, "I'll have 2 hamburgers, please." My mom ate the hamburger, thereby passing my dad's one test for marriage, which was to confirm that she was not a vegetarian. And their wedding, which is also known as their second date, took place the next weekend.
Wow.
They then come back to Canada together, and my sister and I were born in Oshawa, Ontario, which is a suburb about 1 hour east of Toronto. So that's the root origin of how I came to be.
Resilience is in your bones, it sounds like. Tell me about growing up in this family with parents who really escaped from environments and situations that were challenging and got to Canada ultimately and started building a life.
Yeah, absolutely. We can zoom in on either of my parents to talk about resilience, but I'll focus on my mom just for the sake of the question. So my mom was born the youngest of 8 kids. So there was at the time 3 boys and 4 girls, and they were really hoping for a 4th boy to even it out. So it'd be like 4 boys, 4 girls. But actually, a girl was born, and the numbers were tilted to 3 boys and 5 girls. And the reaction culturally and in the family and in the extended family and in the neighborhood was, oh no, like another girl? Boys were the prized possession. Everybody hoped and dreamed and prayed that they had a boy. A boy represented a future dowry that you were going to get, a future daughter-in-law in this ancient archetypal heteronormative society that was going to make you chai and cook you lentils in your old age. It was a form of a social type of pension. And so when my mom was born, the first resilience she faced was just the disappointment with her gender. The second one was that all the education was given to the boys. So my mom's parents, who were doing pretty well in East Africa. So East Africa at the time, for those that don't know the background, was a very large Black majority. Those are the people from there. And then there was this sort of brown or Indian kind of class that was brought in. And then there was a white kind of colonialist cream on top. They were what my mom calls them as the rulers. They were the rulers of the country. And so my mom's family did fairly well. They had a wealthy background, as I mentioned, and they also had the skills to buy and manage and rent residential real estate properties. However, the family's income was all given to the boys for schooling. The girls received $0 total. However, there was one national exam similar to the SATs in the US that was conducted in Kenya at the time. And my mom got first place in the whole country. All the kids took it at age 12. My mom was the only one of the 5 daughters given schooling. She went to Kenya High, which was at the time the best known private boarding school in the whole country. The majority of students were white, but her roommate was not. Her roommate was black. It was Jomo Kenyatta's daughter, Jomo Kenyatta being the first prime minister ever of Kenya. So my mom had the second bout of resilience from an education perspective, but how did she do so well in this test, Lori? When I asked my mom about this, she said she used to sit on her front porch memorizing all the license plates of all the cars that drove by. She would, in the corner of the clattery kitchen, be working on her math homework. She really was studious, and it's not like those two bouts of kind of resilience creating experiences were the only two. It goes on. Her father dies, who she's very close to. My mom was age 18. So 6 years later, my mom's father dies, which was a horrifying experience. There's a very prominent deathbed memory where my mom her hand was squeezed by her dad. And he looked her in the eye and said, "You're going to make something of yourself. You have this, like the world is your oyster." And she really has channeled that her whole life. But at the same time, her father was dying and she was age 18, graduating from Kenya High and starting to become an accountant. The whole East Africa was crumbling. And the history here is that there was a dictator in nearby Uganda named Idi Amin, Amin, and he asked all the brown people, all the Indian people to leave the country. And so the neighboring countries like Tanzania, Kenya, or Kenya, again, depending how you call it, my mom calls it Kenya, there was a lot of unrest, and a lot of people, like my mom's family, were leaving at the same time because it was unsafe to stay there. So she had the trauma of leaving her homeland, losing her father, left and went to England. And when she met this guy, this long sideburn physicist from a poor family, when she was from a wealthy family originally, she was like, "Who's this guy?" Meanwhile, a week later, she's marrying him because it wasn't her choice. It was her mom's, and her mom wanted to marry the kids off so that they could have lives elsewhere. And my dad's, remember I said he was from a poor family? But he had one thing that made him rich, Lori. You know what it was? Canadian immigration. He had the ticket to living in this great, glorious country of Canada, which felt like a safe haven for my mom's family. And so I asked my mom, when it comes to resilience, "Mom, you're born the wrong gender." I'm using that in quotation marks to reflect the cultural expectation and belief system at the time. You had no education given to you the way your brothers did, but you earned one. Your father died. On top of all that, she has to leave the only country she's ever known. I asked her, like, how'd you get through all that? And you don't crash land in Toronto. Toronto is like a big metropolis. You're from Nairobi. You're from London. She lands in Oshawa. This is, for those that don't know Oshawa, Ontario, this was like a blue-collar, entirely white town in the 1970s. She must have felt like she was just somewhere totally different. And she said to me, and I'll always remember this, she's like, "I just told myself, I don't know what it's like to live in England, ... yet. I don't know what it's like to live in Canada, yet. I don't know this man, yet. I don't eat meat, yet." She was a vegetarian till the burger, like he ordered 2 burgers, so she ate it, but she had grown up vegetarian. She maybe has eaten a little bit of meat, but when you come to Oshawa in the 1970s, trust me, if you ask for a vegetarian food at the restaurant, they'll be picking bacon bits out of your Caesar salad. You know what I'm saying? You're not getting anything else. So she basically started eating meat to kind of fit into the culture. And so this idea that the word yet, Y-E-T, could kind of force open a door that she perceived to be locked shut was always a really powerful metaphor for resilience for me. So you asked me to zoom in to kind of my origin story in terms of resilience. Well, my mom's story and the idea of adding a yet to any sentence we mentally begin with I can't, I don't, I won't, has been a helpful aid. So these days, today, in 2024, when we're talking, if I say to myself, I'm not creative, I can't write that book, I don't speak Japanese, I don't play goalie, I just add a yet to the end of those sentences. I'm not creative yet. I can't write that book yet. I don't speak Japanese yet.
I love this.
Yet.
I love that. It's such a simple way to shift your mindset to be more open and willing to learn something new or try something new. It's fabulous. One teeny tiny little word. Was that what it was like growing up for you?
I didn't learn about a lot of these stories till as I was getting older, and then, I did write a book on resilience called "You Are Awesome," which I hate that title, by the way. It was supposed to be called "The Resilience Equation" to reflect my book that I had written previously called "The Happiness Equation." But the publisher, being so fastidiously obsessed with the word "awesome," overruled me and called it "You Are Awesome." So I got to control the subtitle, which was "How to Navigate Change, Wrestle with Failure, and Live an Intentional Life." But ultimately, that's my thought on resilience. So it was honestly, while I was writing that book, that I learned a lot of these stories. But truthfully, when I was growing up, to answer your question, my parents let me sign up for everything, and they signed me up for everything, but they also let me quit everything. So I signed up for cartooning. I quit cartooning. I signed up for skating. I quit skating. I don't mean I quit like immediately. I mean, I quit like, sometimes 1 week later, sometimes 1 month later, sometimes 1 year later, but I always quit. I did Beavers. I did Cubs. I quit. I did Hindi classes. I quit. And so looking back now from the vantage point of, I'm 44 now as we're speaking, I have a bit of an ambivalent relationship with this kind of always letting me quit. They weren't the type of parents that forced me to stay into things that I didn't enjoy. And they certainly were of the, David Epstein kind of modern range-like thinking, for those that know the book Range, which I highly recommend, which is kind of give your kids exposure to as many things as possible. Don't force anything specifically. Let them have a diverse set of experiences as opposed to forcing them into, for example, like baseball at age 6. Therefore, you would think that you described me as a speaker earlier or a writer earlier. You would think, oh, well, that's fine, Neil. You kind of found the stuff you love. But actually, I have an ambivalent relationship with it today because I'll tell you what, Lori, I wish I spoke more languages than just English. I wish I could swim well, whereas like they let me quit music. So it's like, it's hard to know as a parent, I think now, what you let your kids quit and what you don't. And I'm so grateful that they let me try many things and let me quit many things as I was growing up. And I also look back and think, man, I really wish they'd forced me into a couple of those things so I had those skills today.
Yeah. I feel you on the parenting side. I think my parenting looks a lot like your parents. My kids try things and frequently quit. And my daughter, my oldest, who's 22 now, looks back and says, Mom, I wish you would have made me keep playing the stand-up bass. She did that for 5 or 6 years. But you know what, Neil? Maybe you're just not a good swimmer yet.
Exactly. Well, you know the story of me learning to swim.
I love this story. This story.
Yeah, we'll use the swimming story as a bit of foreshadowing / teaser for something later in the conversation. And for now, jumping from my teen years into my 20s. And what happened between my teen years and my 20s was this. I graduated, a very academic kid, thick glasses, big gap teeth, editor and founder of my high school newspaper, played clarinet in the pit band for the Secret Garden and My Fair Lady, was on the chess club, was on the badminton. I mean, you could not better define nerd, you know what I mean, than me in high school. I take that, I go to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Shout out to anyone that went there for 4 years to take a Bachelor of Commerce degree. I get a wonderful job at Procter & Gamble. I'm the brand manager for CoverGirl and Max Factor Makeup. And my time at Queen's University was wonderful. I spent most of my time at Golden Words, which was the largest and only weekly campus humor newspaper in the country. Had a circulation that far eclipsed the original kind of real news newspaper. So I 20 hours a week on my business classes and 40 hours a week on this kind of campus comedy newspaper, getting my, I won't say 10,000 hours of writing experience, but probably something like 2,000 or 3,000. And then I graduate and I do this Procter & Gamble marketing job. It doesn't work out. It was like really not on my alley. It was, I talk about this at length in You Are Awesome. And then I go and start up a sub-franchise. So my dad and I teamed up, took out a $280,000 loan from a bank. I had to get his sign off and all this stuff. We had to put like a certain amount down. And I bought a franchise. And it was a wonderful experience, but it also made no money at all. I got to learn a lot. I got to sign a lease. I got to hire a staff, but I had to come up with my own hiring process. 5-minute interview, communicating your passion, a sandwich exam on testing your recipes. I made up this whole thing. Well, they loved my hiring process, so they used it across the whole chain. And that kept happening. I kept coming up with like a customer complaint response kit. And I made it into stickers and I stuck them on my cash register. Well, suddenly every franchisee wanted that. So I learned a ton, but then it made no money. So after, even though I had no turnover, I had great hiring practices, and we had loved working there. It was firing cookies through the oven. It was fun, but I didn't make any money. So eventually I sold my store at a loss. I think the store cost me $300,000 all in to buy. And I think I sold it for like $250 or something. So I like lost money on the whole experience. Kind of soured me on entrepreneurship for a while. And then I went to Harvard, which sounds like the most abrupt, hilarious, bizarre left turn from failed marketing brand manager to failed restaurateur. But the reason I got into Harvard, I've come to realize over the years, is because I had a very unconventional resume. And as we all know, maybe we all don't, but I believe different is better than better. When it comes to resilience, let's remember this phrase: different is better than better. If you're getting 1,000 resumes from people with private equity and banking experience, well, the one guy who's like a comedy writer from Queens, who did marketing at Procter & Gamble, who started up and failed a restaurant, I stood out like a sore thumb. And obviously I had to get the GMAT score and the reference letters, but I had enough people that said they liked me. So I got in. Trust me, I was shocked too. And I was even more shocked by after I got in, I get a letter, and the letter says, "Excuse me, we're Harvard. Thanks for congratulations, you got in. Could you tell us the last 3 years of your T4?" So in Canada, there's a T4, which is, I don't know what the thing's called in the US, but it's like the one form that tells you how much money you made last year.
Like a W-2 in the US.
Like a W-2 in the US. So in Canada, that's called a T4. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I sent them my last 3 T4s. Well, guess what they were? 0, because I was going to Queens. $51,500 because I worked for 10 months, not even a year, at Procter & Gamble. It's probably like $48,000 or something. And 0, because my restaurant made no money. So 0, 50, 0. And then they wrote me another letter and said, "Congratulations, you're so poor that we're going to pay for you to come here." And Harvard, sits on an $18 billion endowment, so they look for the poorest kids. And I was one of them. And it was a bit funny to me because here I'd gone to Queen's University as an undergrad student. They asked for my parents' T4s, right? Because it's your parent. You know this from a 22-year-old dog. It's your parents' T4. But for grad school, they asked for your T4s or your W. So I was like, woohoo! So Harvard paid for me to go to Harvard, which was another shocking, delightful surprise. I go to Harvard for 2 years. I come out, and in the 2 years that happened there, I met a girl, I fell in love, I got married, I graduate from Harvard. It's the middle to late aughts. And I'm like, finally, Lori, I'm about to start my life. I'm like in my late 20s. I like got some degrees. I got married. I'm buying a house. I get a job at Walmart. I'm working in leadership development. Well, then that's where the bottom fell off. So my wife leaves me for another guy. My best friend, Chris, who was my best friend from Harvard, we went on a 10,000-mile road trip together after graduating. We talked on the phone every day. He takes his own life. And as I lose my marriage, and as I lose my best friend, as I lose my house, and I lose my community, I also lose my weight. I lost 40 pounds due to stress over the next few months. I was desperately searching for the view of myself that I had the idea that life was good, that there are good things in this life. And I couldn't see it. It was scary. It was disorienting, but I thought, here's some of the thoughts I had. I'm unlovable. I am ugly. I am unworthy of marriage. I am not able to save a friend in need. I'm not a good friend. Like, you can see where the sort of mental statements were going in my head. Plus, these days and those days, if you look on the news or you look on social media, well, guess what? That algorithmically derived echo chamber will only reconfirm our belief systems that we hold. So if you're listening to this right now and you're going through a divorce, or you're going through loss of a friend, or you're going through the loss of a job, or you're going through personal doubt around how you look or feel or think about yourself, I want you just to listen to me really clearly right now. Do not listen to what the internet is telling you about it. The algorithms feed us something that will push our mind a little nudge forward so that we can watch it, think that's what we're thinking, think that's what we believe, and consume more advertisements. Because I think there's always people like me who do not realize that the culture that we now live in is representative of how we feel, not the other way around.
Well, Neil, how did you come out of that? I mean, that's a lot of heavy, hard things to get through at the same time. I mean, is what you're saying is that this is what set you on the path to understanding happiness?
I didn't really know what else to do, Lori, but remember I told you in high school I was the founder and editor of my high school newspaper. And remember I told you at Queens I was spending 40 hours a week, double my class workload for 4 straight years on a weekly paper, for 4 straight years on a campus humor newspaper. So when push came to shove and I suddenly ended up crash landing in a downtown Toronto bachelor apartment, I never lived alone before. I never lived in a big city before. I reached for the only thing I knew how to do, which was write. I knew how to write. I had written. That had been a salvation. That had been a safe space, a private space, a secluded space, a personal space. So I type in how to start a blog, and I start up a little website called 1000awesomethings.com. Why awesome things? You're probably like, well, why'd you focus on the positive? Well, I knew I needed it. You know, my dad had come to Canada in 1966 as an unbridled, optimistic immigrant, marveling at the stickers and all the fruits and vegetables. If you watch my TED Talk, the very last story I tell in my TED Talk is about my dad's kind of, immigrant optimism, for lack of better words. And I had that injected in me as a kid. And I knew I missed it and I didn't have it. I had lost it and I'd lost that part of myself. Because I was thinking about my divorce and losing my friend and whatever the social media stuff was telling me to listen to. And so I called it 1000awesomethings.com. If you read the first post, honestly, it's not very good. It took me a while to find my voice. I was writing about broccoli. I was writing about, one of my first entries was like fat baseball players because they give us hope. You know what I mean? So I was just trying to find my voice. I was trying to find what is it? And then I eventually started to find it. It was celebrating the tiny little moments of joy that cumulatively add up to filling up our days and our weeks and our months and our lives. And I'm talking to you today in 2024. It's literally just me every night at midnight sending out one awesome thing. I have done that since 2008. I've now written over 5,000 awesome things. The blog got really popular, won a whole bunch of awards. The Book of Awesome came out in 2010. It has been a New York Times bestseller and on international bestseller lists for over 200 weeks and 8 straight years. And it was the start of a foundational series of books I have written and I'm still writing, which now totals 10 books today, constantly thinking about searching, finding, distilling, and sharing everything I can learn about how to live an intentional life.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and reiterate here, right? Because I think just in the last few minutes, you said 2 things that are really, really important, right? And one is we get these voices in our head that tell us we're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not a good enough friend, spouse, parent, whatever that voice is. It can be so negative. And I think we all experience that. And the antidote was to focus on positive things.
You're right. Although I sort of disparage those early awesome things, they were a pathfinding type of writing that was helping me to sort out. And look, if I was on the blogging homepage, it meant I wasn't on the newspaper homepage. I wasn't on cable news. I wasn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even just the idea of mentally focusing on something, even if you suck at it, well, it's better than what you might have been focusing on, or even worse, getting caught up in behaviors that you look back on with regret. And I don't mean any judgment, but I was certainly flirting with those types of things as well.
Yeah, and this notion of, I think what we're talking about right now is gratitude, right? So finding the positive in your situation. There are hard things, but in every hard thing, there is an opportunity to find a good thing.
Yeah, well, I have a lot to say on this topic.
Yeah, well, let's hear it.
Well, here's the thing. Let's start off just first from like an evolutionary psychology perspective. We have a part of our brain that is the oldest part of our brain. It's called our amygdala. It's spelled Amygdala. So just from an evolutionary biology perspective, this thing has been evolving for longer than we have been human. So we have been human, Homo sapiens, for 200 to 300,000 years, depending on which evolutionary psychologists and biologists you buy and believe, but still pretty tight range, 200 to 300,000 years. And we've been Homo, like, before Homo sapiens, we were, Homo erectus for 2 to 3 million years, right? And the amygdala was part of that. And if you go back all the way into like dinosaurs, I'm talking like tens to hundreds of millions of years ago, the amygdala is part of that. Like the amygdala has been, this is almost kind of a pre-human part of us. And as I talk right now, my amygdala, which is about the size of a walnut in the core of my noggin, it's firing right now. And so is yours. And so is yours listening to this. So we have to be aware that we have something in our brain that is secreting fight or flight hormones at us all day. And this is the oldest part of our brain. It is simply, does it eat me or do I eat it? This is the part of the brain that flashes when you rubberneck on the highway to look at the car accident on the other side of the traffic lanes. This is the part of your brain that when the doctor hands you back a blood test, what does your brain do? It quickly looks for like the one thing you got wrong, like the high cholesterol or whatever. We want to read the 1-star reviews. And the reason we want to do that is because our brains are oriented to look for problems, find problems, and solve problems. I'll say those 3 things again. Look for problems, find problems, and solve problems. And those in the legal profession, that might even be dialed up even more.
Yeah, it is actually. Dr. Larry Richard and I wrote an article a couple years ago, actually right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic in the US. And his research, so he is a psychologist that focuses on lawyers, legal profession. And his research shows that lawyers have a higher than average tendency to skew negative. And his theory and hypothesis is this is because training to be a lawyer requires that you look for the negative, you look for the problems. And then your job, what you get paid, compensated, review for, is how you solve it, how quickly and how well. And so lawyers really do struggle, according to this research, to navigate relationships sometimes, to feel part and connected to social groups sometimes, and other times to have effective resilience mechanisms. So that really is something that challenges this profession in particular.
I absolutely agree and hear you and relate and know this to be true. And so that kind of begs the question, what do we do about it? Here we are talking about this idea that gratitude is good. And by the way, that's not just Lori and Neil saying this. Emmons and McCullough took 3 groups of people. They split them into 3. They had group number 1 write down 5 gratitudes a week. Group number 2 write down 5 hassles a week. Group number 3 write down 5 events a week. Over a 10-week period, the people that wrote down gratitudes were not just happier, but they were physically healthier. And they didn't go to the gym. They just wrote down gratitudes. So gratitude recall and gratitude writing, gratitude kind of preservation is actually very powerful for us. If you think of a bicep curl at the gym, well, gratitude is something akin to like a brain curl. You are, there's that old phrase in the neurology world, neurons that fire together, wire together. You're kind of teaching your brain kind of what to focus on. And the way you do this is by triggering an area in your visual cortex called area 17, and it lights up the more specific the recall is. So how do you practice gratitudes in your life? Well, I have a 2-minute morning practice that I always use every day. And if I don't use it one day, I don't beat myself up. I just do it the next day. When I wake up in the morning in that really precious liminal state between subconscious and conscious, which Dr. Andrew Huberman has been talking about a lot on the Huberman Lab podcast lately, it's a very vital and powerful part of your day. It's when you're the most you, before your cell phone sends you dinging and pinging in a million different directions and everybody tells you what your priorities are and should be. I say, write down 3 things. I will let go of, I am grateful for, I will focus on. One more time. I will let go of, I am grateful for, I will focus on. And I could go into the research for all 3 of those science-based prompts, but for now, let's just focus on the second one, which is I am grateful for. Most people, when you ask them to write down gratitude, they say, oh yeah, my husband, my kid, my dog. Unfortunately, that's not detailed enough to trigger your visual cortex. What you really need to write down is not my husband, but when my husband Antonio put the toilet seat down. Not my kid, but when my 5-year-old daughter Sonia learned how to write the letter S. Not my dog, but when, the rescue puppy we got and the pandemic stopped peeing on my kids' pillows. Like, all I'm doing is adding one extra layer of specificity, and that's all it takes in order for the gratitude to actually trigger that visual cortex that helps you double and triple, if you read your own journal, triple the positive experiences of your day. The reason that's important is because whether you're a lawyer or not, our brains have an amygdala in them. We're oriented to look for problems. And I will say the news media and social media landscape helps to confirm and push this worldview at us because, of course, our amygdala gets tickled and triggered and we can't stop looking at the horrifying news. So then we look at more ads as well. So you see, the orientation of the model is one that feeds our amygdala rather than doing what Lori and I are saying to do today, which is kind of go the other way. And so going the other way is hard. And right now in society, almost everyone has a plastic card in their wallet that gives them access to a gym, right? I think right now in society, we're missing a card in our wallet. Nobody's got a plastic card in their wallet, giving them $59.99 a month. I pay for my mental health or my mental well-being. We don't have that cultural conceit yet, but we should. And so I'm giving it to you today. Gratitude is a massive ingredient on developing a more resilient mind. And one way to practice gratitude is when you wake up in the morning, don't look at your phone right away. Move the phone to the other side of the bedroom. Plug it into a lockbox if you want to, like I do. And, write down, I will let go of, get rid of something that's bothering you. I am grateful for. Spend a minute thinking about some positive things that happened to you over the last day or two. And then I will focus on carving a will do from your endless could do and should do. Decision fatigue is also a problem when it comes to developing a resilience mind. So I will focus on lets you decide your single biggest priority of the day before the world tells you what it is.
Yeah. And just to recap, the reason why the gratitude piece, so first of all, I love all 3 of those questions, but the reason why the gratitude piece is particularly important is because we have to train our brain to associate with the positive, because our natural tendency is to look for the negative, the danger, what's going to eat me, right? That's the recap of what you just described.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Exactly. It's work. If I said to somebody at work today, I went to the gym last night. I did half an hour on the treadmill and then I blasted my delts. Like, that would be a weird sentence, but everyone would nod. Like, that's cool. Like, you invested in your physical health, but no one says, oh, last night I played Rose Thorn Butter on the dinner table with my kids as a little gratitude practice. And then, I read a couple pages of fiction to sort of calm my mind down. And then I invested in my mental health with a little bit of, 20 minutes of journaling before bed. Have you heard anyone say that? Like, no one talks like that. So what I'm saying is, notice in society, look at the water we're swimming in. The water we're swimming in has a huge disproportionate biased towards physical health. And this theme of this podcast, resilience, is one element of having strong mental health. That's missing. Like, we don't talk about it like that. It's not open.
Right. I agree. And that's why I'm so glad you're on. I want to talk more about what else we can do, right? So we've talked a while about gratitude. You've talked a little bit about journaling, but some of the other things that are in your happiness equation book, which is one of my favorite books that you've written. So you talk about being out in nature. You talk about, is it a 2-minute midday sort of happiness check-in? Tell us some other things that we can do.
I got a lot to say on here. So first of all, for the sake of argument, let's do 5. Okay, let's do 5. I've already given you 2. One of which is a 2-minute morning practice. I will let go of. I'm grateful for. I will focus on. Another one I gave you, which I did it in passing, we don't need to go deep into it, is a gratitude game you can play at dinner called Rose, Rose, Thorn, Bud. Hey, honey, what's your rose from the day? Oh, I got an assistant hockey practice. Oh, there's a new donut at the coffee shop. Oh, my boss gave me a complimentary email and CC'd her boss. Okay? Go around the table, do that with your partner, with your kids, with your grandma, whatever. And then a thorn is something that did not go. We want to have a safe venting space. And then a bud, B-U-D, something you're looking forward to. Research shows that we are happier when we have something to look forward to. It doesn't matter if it's a week from now, make a stack of pancakes on Saturday. It doesn't matter if it's 5 decades from now. I want to rent a villa in Tuscany when I'm 100. What's created in our minds when we have something to look forward to is a more positive mindset. So that's 2. And I said, let's do 5. So I'll give you 3 more. One that you just hinted at is nature. We are currently experiencing the lowest level of nature, like the lowest levels of being outside ever in human history. As you may recall, we used to be 100% outside. It used to be all outside. That's all we had. And now we're inside 93% of the time. That's a real number from the American Time Use Study. So just for a second, just look holistically at our species. I mean, just forget the whole, you don't got to go millions of years ago. Just go to your childhood. Kids these days spend 7% of their days outside. Well, I'm guaranteeing you, when you were a kid, Lori, when I was a kid, it was definitely double, if not triple that. Just one generation, like we weren't sucked into the vortex of endless screens. We're on screens over 11 hours a day now. I mean, I know it wasn't 11 hours a day when I was a kid. We didn't have computers. So that took away the tablets. You know what I mean? So we got the lowest ever levels of nature exposure in history. Wow. Why is that important? Well, because it turns out that being outside is really good for us. Really good for us. Trees release a chemical called phytoncides, Phytoncides, that reduce our cortisol, that reduce our adrenaline levels. These are the stress hormones. If you're feeling stressed, you might just not be outside enough. Okay? Being outside also does stuff for us that we don't yet know how to interpret. We're starting to. Dr. Ching Li, who I interviewed for my podcast, he's the world's preeminent researcher on Shinrin-yoku. He's based out of Osaka University. He says that being outside does, it improves your cardiovascular health. It increases your white blood cell count. It lowers your risk for cancer. It increases your resilience. It increases your ability to focus on a task. It strengthens your relationship with your spouse. It strengthens it's like 100 positive benefits have come out of the research on Shinrin-yoku. The research is actually pretty revolutionary, and it basically says, go outside. Go outside. If you're listening to this inside, and you could be listening to this outside, go outside. Just go outside. That's number 3. Okay, I'll give you that one. Singing, that's the one you've not heard me speak about, Lori, but there's a lot of research on singing. Singing together is proven over and over again to make you happier, especially with a group.
So I have a question about that one. So do you have to sing with a group, or is jamming in your car on the way to work and singing at the top of your lungs all by yourself enough?
So you're asking enough, what's the minimum effective dose kind of thing? Yeah, singing in your car on the way to work is definitely great for you. And you could even argue it is with somebody or whoever's on the radio, right? Mm-hmm. But I'll also add in that the reason singing with a group is so powerful is because there's a community element And the number one driver of long-term happiness is the strength of our relationships with our friends and family. It's from the 1938 Harvard Adult Development Study, the 2006 book by Daniel Gilbert called Stumbling on Happiness, and more recent research from Saya Lubomirsky at University of California. So being in a choir or being in a big group, it clarifies that. You look around like you're with people all smiling and singing. So that's just sort of better.
And so singing's one way to do it, but it is what I'm hearing you say, that a connection to a community is another way to do it.
Yeah. And so there's obviously these pieces, as you can look at them from as a puzzle, they obviously overlap, but connection to community is massive. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy now suggests that the next big epidemic facing our culture is loneliness. Surgeon generals have historically put out warnings against things like AIDS and cigarette smoking and obesity. Well, the latest Surgeon General's warning, which is like a dense 90-page report that came out in 2023, is about loneliness as the next big epidemic. And 1 in 2 American adults reports that they experience loneliness, which is proven. And the research study is right in the front of the Surgeon General's report. Anybody can look it up. Anybody can look this up. It's worse for our health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So isn't that weird that in the most connected society ever, we are more lonely than ever? Esther Perel has a line I heard her say the other day, which I thought was wonderful, which is, we all got 1,000 friends on social media, but nobody to feed our cat.
Yeah, that is so interesting because you're right. It's easy to feel very connected through screens and technology and devices, but we're not connected in the way that we are in physical proximity to each other or in real time sharing experiences, observations, and the moments of life as they happen. Right. And is that really what it is then? Having that proximity to people and the ability to experience life in real time?
Yeah, that's part of it. Here's the thing. We've always been tribal. There's a wonderful Oxford researcher named Robin Dunbar who has studied primates for 40 years. He studied chimpanzees, he studied orangutans, and he studied over the last 20 years humans. He's now 76 years old. I just interviewed him for my podcast. And he has coined a term that some people may be familiar with called Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number is the cognitive limit in a human brain for the number of friends you can have. Friends, of course, includes anybody. You could be blood relatives or not blood relatives, but they are two-way, that's an important word, two-way relationships. Okay, so you have a cognitive capacity, Lori, as do I, for 150 two-way friendship relationships. You might say, oh, I would never get that high, or that's too low for me. Well, it's one in a series of numbers. You know, you have 50 big backyard barbecue friends. Those are the people you would invite over if you had a last-minute barbecue at your house. You have 500 acquaintances, and you have 5,000 total faces you can recall. These are, again, proven, very scientifically proven cognitive limits. And 150 is pretty high. You know, chimpanzees have 50. So if you look at the average wedding size in the US over the last 50 years, it is exactly 150. If you look at the average village size in a British village for the last 8,000 years, it is 150. If you look at the number of people that see the average wedding card, it goes to the average of 68 households. The average number of people that see it is 150. So this cognitive limit has been proven over and over in society. So one of the happiness and resilience exercises I will give you, and this will be the 5th of my 5-point bullet series, because I had given you 4 already, is to phone a friend. It's to reach out to somebody in your 150. Who's your 150? Well, the simple test is, if you sent out a Christmas card today, or if you got married today, who would be there? Who would come to your once-in-a-lifetime event? Maybe it's a distant cousin. Maybe it's an old coworker, an old mentor. Maybe it's someone you mean to reach out to more than you actually do. And you send them a 2-minute voice note over your phone. And you just do 3 things. You state the value of the relationship. You share something that's going on in your life. And you seek something from them, a question that they can answer. You state, you share, and you seek. And if you make that recording less than 2 minutes with somebody in your 150-person social circle, then you will be driving a more resilient and positive mindset?
I love it. So I'm going to recap the 5 real quick, and you can correct me if I get any of them wrong. But the first one was gratitude, and this can look like journaling or saying to yourself, but doing this every day to retrain the brain to look for the positive and not the negative. The second one was sharing and finding a safe space to talk about what's good, what's bad, and what you look forward to. The third one is nature, being out in nature, hopefully significantly more than the average human does today. So we can benefit from all of the ways that nature positively impacts our bodies and our brains. 4 was having a community. And in particular, if you can sing with your community, that's fantastic. But mostly being connected to other humans. And then the 5th one was phone a friend, right? And it doesn't have to be long or intense, 2 minutes or less to state something, share something, and seek something. And I just want to ask you a question on this last one, because I feel like this may be something people ask you a lot. Well, what if it's someone I haven't talked to in a long time? What if they don't want to hear from me? What if it feels kind of weird? What do you say to that?
Well, what I say to that is that's totally relatable. Everyone feels that way. I got an email last week from a plant manager at a paper plant in Ohio. And he said to me, Neil, I heard you talking about this phone a friend message down in Florida. I thought it was totally weird. I thought it was totally cheesy. But honestly, I really living out here in Ohio, running this paper mill. I got my wife, I got my kids, but I really have lost touch with a lot of old friends, with a lot of old college buddies, with a lot of old relatives. And I thought, what do I have to lose? So every day for lunch, since I heard you speak till now, I've been reaching out like you told me, 2 minutes or less. I tell people, I heard this weirdo speak at a conference and he told me to do this, so that's why I'm doing it. But I just wanted to reach out because I really like you, I miss you, or I love you, depending on the relation. Here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm up to, here's what we're doing this weekend, or here's what I'm struggling. And what about you? How are you doing? And he's like, he wrote me in the email that despite the awkwardness and the hesitation I had, this has by far and away been the greatest thing I've done for my happiness in my entire life. Like, it's unbelievable how great I feel every day because someone who I haven't talked to is now reaching out and they inevitably say, so good to hear from you. Oh my gosh, I was thinking I'd my fault that we lost touch. Like this person is now experiencing what we know to be the number one driver of long-term happiness, which is the strength of your relationships with your friends and family. So a modicum, a tiny, infinitesimally small investment is just gonna explode like fireworks for you. And if you reach out to 5 people, by the way, and 3 don't reply, who cares? You were at 0 out of 5 before you started. Now you're at 2 out of 5.
I love that. I love that story.
Way better.
And I think it answers the question of, what if people are skeptical? I think if people are skeptical, you just try it. You don't have anything to lose by trying to be grateful for a few days or a few weeks. You don't have anything to lose by phoning a friend or being out in nature, right? Maybe you get a mosquito bite, but maybe also you're able to refocus yourself and take deeper breaths and experience more happiness, right? You really don't 100%. Have anything to lose.
Yeah, and I think fear is natural. And, we can talk about fear as it relates to me learning how to swim if you want.
Oh, I do want you to tell this story. I love this story. Please.
So basically, what if I'm scared? What if I'm afraid? What if I reach out to this friend and they don't answer? Well, that is fear. That is fear. And fear is an emotion we should talk about more often. It's an experience and an emotion that we all feel every single day. It's one of the core human feelings. You feel it every day. You might be feeling it right now. Are you walking on the edge of a road? Part of your brain is afraid of getting hit by a car. Like, we have fear in our minds all the time. So I'll tell you what I was scared of my whole childhood. I didn't mention it, although I did mention the glasses and the buck teeth. Well, the grand nerd also had ear infections his whole childhood, like kind of classic. And then I had tubes in my ears my whole childhood, so I never learned how to swim, ever. And how do you learn anything? Well, it's a 3-step model. Anyone with an HR background knows this. Can do leads to want to do, leads to do. Can do is capability. Want to do is motivation. Doing is action. Can do leads to want to do, leads to do. Right? So, can I swim? No. So do I want to swim? No. So do I do it? Do I swim? No. And it's not just me and swimming. It's all of us with everything. Like, you want to run a marathon, you're like, I need perfect running shoes. I got to get a great pump me up playlist. I need a running buddy to wake me up at 7 a.m. And then I'll be motivated. Then I'll want to do it. And then I'll run the marathon. That's how we think about learning or doing anything we're afraid of, right? Now, I think I got to the point in my personal story where I had crash landed in downtown Toronto into a 500 square foot shoebox apartment, living alone for the first time, living in a big city for the first time. What I didn't tell you yet is that it took me a year after my divorce till I finally went on online dating sites. And then it took me another year till I went on a second date, which is my way of saying that I had a lot of first dates. I actually liked everybody, Lori, but then after I texted everybody, they never got back to me. I think I have a lot of, nervous energy, and this is kind of my natural baseline kind of energy. So it's a lot for people. And I'm 44. You should have seen it when I was in my 20s. it was like dialed up like another 5 notches. So anyway, it took me 2 years after my divorce to get a second date. And it's with a woman named Leslie. She's a teacher. It's dinner now. So it's like a 3-hour investment, not just like drinks where anyone can just run away. And I'm looking at her. She's looking at me. We're having this great conversation. And she asked me, so Neil, do you like swimming? And I'm like, swimming? What the? Like, who's asking me this on a second? Like, what is this? And I said, no, not really. And she's like, swimming is my favorite thing to do in the whole world. My family has a lake house for generations on an island. And every single day in the summer, my 80-year-old grandparents, my 5-year-old cousins, we jump in the lake and we swim around the island. And then she says, she sees my face, which is like stricken, which is like horrified. And she's like, well, don't worry about it. I guess you just can't come. Well, that night, instead of doing what I usually do, discuss, debate, make a spreadsheet online with like pros and cons, I just did it. I signed up for adult learn to swim classes at the downtown City of Toronto pool.
That very night.
That very night. It was $40 for 8 weeks, right? So I was like, bye. Well, I went to the pool deck on Tuesday night at 7:30, wearing my goggles, wearing my life jacket. Teacher gives me a flutterboard. There's 10 other people there. We get in the shallow end, because she said, get in the shallow end, the water's up to your waist, walk around with this irrelevant dry flutterboard. And then she's like, thanks so much for coming. It's been half an hour. I'll see you next week. I'm like, what the heck was this? This was a lesson? I get out of the pool. I dry off my legs. I go home. Next Tuesday night, 7:30, same thing. I come out in the pool deck. She's like, same as last week. Get in the shallow end. I'm like, what? That's it? She's like, walk around. If you feel comfortable, you can go up to your stomach. You can go up to your chest. It's like, okay. So I go up to my stomach, go up to my chest. She's like, thanks so much for coming. It's been half an hour. I'll see you next week. I'm like, there's only 8 classes. I'm done 2 of them. But I'll tell you what, Lori, it was weird what happened in my brain on the walk home. I thought to myself, that was easy. I can do that. I can do that. And I told people I found a new restaurant right outside the pool now. I like going there for dinner. I'm showering at night now instead of the mornings. I'm telling people I'm doing it. So the 3rd week, I wanted to do it. Week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, little deeper. Lose the flutterboard, lose the life jacket. By the end of the 8 weeks, I could do the front crawl. That summer, I swam around the island. And the takeaway from the story of me learning to swim in my 30s is that it's a false assemblage that we've put in front of our brains that you need to go can do, want to do. That's not true. It's actually the opposite. It's you have to do, then you think you can do, and then you want to do. So a different way of saying it is we grow up thinking that motivation leads to action, but it turns out that action leads to motivation.
And I think that is such a perfect way to tie it all together, right? Because we started with your mom who says, yet, right? And so you just didn't know how to swim yet until that second date and that sign up in that series of 8 classes. And then we talked about the voices in your head that sometimes tell us we're not good enough, we're not strong enough, we're not a good enough partner, leader, lawyer, whatever it is. And this fantastic formula, right? Just do. Really believe that it's just not yet, and don't believe the negative things we say. Work on some of the gratitude, nature sharing things that we talked about. But more than anything, I love this. Just do. And the more you do, the more you want to do. And the more you want to do, the more you can do. And this is true, I think, for all things.
It is true for all things. And it is also Newton's second law of physics, which is an object in motion will remain in motion unless hit by an equal or greater force. So that just means if you can muster up the courage to start, whatever it is you want to do, if you could just start, you're likely to keep going. It's harder to stop now.
Yeah, I think we try so hard to make things complicated. And it's really very simple. And so, if you think about building a big career or whatever the career of your dreams is, I think the first step is the hardest one. And like you said, just do, and you get there.
Just do, and you get there.
I love it. Neil, this has been great. I always love talking to you. I love the energy you bring to everything and the stories and the research. And mostly I love how simple you make something that could be really hard, right? It doesn't have to be hard. Whatever you're going through in your career, if you're in a moment of resilience where you need to dig deep, it really doesn't have to be hard. I get that it feels hard, and it can be hard, and moments can be hard, but we can make it simple, right? Just start by doing, thinking about some gratitude, using some of the tips that you shared. I love the stories. I love the advice. And so I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast today. Thank you.
It's my absolute pleasure. I love the energy you're putting out into the world. I love the podcast. Thank you for doing all the work you're doing. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Neil, as we wrap up this conversation, the takeaway that I'm most inspired by is the power of happiness to change our perspective and elevate our outlook no matter what situation we find ourselves in. As always, I'm happier for having spent time with you, and I'm grateful for the actionable strategies for nurturing joy that you've shared. From the power of journaling and identifying specific gratitude insights daily, to the importance of community, personal connection, and embracing the outdoors, the insights you shared are not just about fostering happiness, but about building resilience in our lives. Thank you. We covered a lot on today's episode, and if you want to know more about the Chief Legal Officer's role and many perspectives across legal leadership, visit us on Deloitte.com and search Chief Legal Officer. Do you want to hear from other legal leaders on this podcast? What can we bring you next? Please share your feedback. We really want to hear from you about topics and leaders of interest. Hit me up on LinkedIn to share your ideas. And for more insights from many iconic and resilient leaders, just go to Deloitte.com/US/resilient. Until next time, remain resilient.